I am very sorry to say that everybody of my age group has at some stage in their childhood been subjected to the horrors of their parents' television preferences. However, at one of these terrifying experiences, watching an episode of Only Fools and Horses, there was a quote which will stick with me forever. The street sweeper, Trigger, is rewarded by the council for using the same broom for 20 years. And he proudly proclaims, "This old broom has had 17 new heads and 14 new handles in its lifetime." Unfortunately, the same can be said of many of our village churches. If you go to an ancient building which is listed in its guidebook as dating back to 1088 AD, there probably isn't much of that ancient building left. It's been completely renovated, completely rebuilt by the Victorians, to the extent that hardly anything of the early church survives. However, today is all about the most ancient music ever written, and I am determined to find a church to match. This is a village called Duntisbourne Rouse, in the deepest Cotswolds. And it's almost like the landscape of a dream, isn't it? It might have looked like this 100 years ago. It might have looked like this 800 years ago. But I can tell you, the church has existed for longer than then. Duntisbourne refers to the River Dunt. And Rouse, well, that's an early owner of this village. A knight, Roger Leroux. Roger the Red. French? Why did a Frenchman own an English village? Does the name William the Conqueror ring any bells? One very quiet village, but one very steep incline tells you just a little bit about the church that we are about to find. If I can find it. If you ever needed a metaphor for the beauty of imperfection, well, look no further than the entrance to St. Michael's churchyard. Perfectly wonky. Almost like it was engineered like that. This is, without a doubt, one of the best kept secrets of Gloucestershire. And as I lean on the church gate and look at this tiny ancient building, you can already tell that this is Anglo-Saxon, in other words, pre-1066. If you look at the west wall on either side of the tower, you can see the way that the church has been built using a kind of diagonal V-shape structure. That's called herringbone, and it was very common in late Saxon and early Norman churches. In the quiet of this churchyard, the dreamlike nature of the village continues. Plenty of houses, but not a person in sight. Up until now, I've only ever seen St. Michael's in picture books, The nave came first, built before the Norman conquest of 1066, and then came the chancel and the crypt in the 12th century. Next, the tower in the 1400s, and a little saddleback roof in 1587. The newest part, the porch, is dated 1756. It seems like everybody who worked here treated this building kindly and with respect for the work of their ancestors. No single designer, and yet a story in stonework spanning more than 1,000 years. The door to the crypt is left leaning open, so I take a look inside. On the floor, there are two big tombs of former rectors, and a mysterious staircase leading up to the chancel. Perhaps there was a medieval relic here sometime, and the crypt was accessed from the church and left through the south door. I suppose we shall never know. I am an introvert born and bred. I could stand outside and proclaim like a proper documentary maker about the history of this church, but I'm afraid I can't do that. This is an introvert's church. This is where I feel completely comfortable and where I can talk to you about how I feel. There are houses all around. You could faintly hear the sound of opera in somebody's garden as they were pottering away in the flower beds. But inside here we enter a different world, don't we? A world well above the level of the 21st century. My reason for coming here is that this church encapsulates the breadth of time over which a church building can be designed and built. And it would be lovely to reflect that in music, or at least to give you a flavour of what the most ancient music sounded like. And that brings us to the harmonium here. You know, this is one of the newer additions to this church, isn't it? It was built in the 19th century, sometime after the 1870s, because it's an Este & Co. harmonium. And it says on the side, this organ was given in memory of the late Katherine Mansfield by her 3 sisters. Who's Katherine Mansfield? A parishioner? That's normally the case when an instrument is given. No, she wasn't. She was a famous author. Many of you will know of her from her short stories. Katherine Mansfield was one of the greatest short story writers of the 20th century. And apparently she was the only author that Virginia Woolf was jealous of. Born in New Zealand in 1888, she moved to London in the early 1900s and achieved national acclaim with short stories like The Garden Party and Bliss, now published in 25 languages. Her maiden name, Beauchamp, provides us with a link to an early Lord of the Manor here at Dunstbourne. And though she never lived here herself, the rectory was once home to her sister, Jean. Katherine was a musician herself, but her creative life was cut tragically short. She contracted tuberculosis in 1917, when she was just 29 years old, and died less than 6 years later. I'm sorry that the musical part of this video has started on such a somber note, but of course it reminds us that so much of the fabric of our ancient buildings is intertwined with people and their memory. Apparently this harmonium was purchased from an antique shop somewhere in England, and it was placed in the church in Catherine's honour. But of course it was built in Utah in America. Playing ancient music on instruments like this can be very tricky indeed. Of course the harmonium is a much more modern instrument than the pipe organ, and pipe organs go all the way back to Roman times. Unbelievable. So to ease me in, I decided to play something much newer, something contemporary with the date of the harmonium. And it's also a hymn which I've played many times at reflective events and services. It's based on the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd." "The Lord is my shepherd." I was playing that hymn at a steadier pace there because I was just getting used to the instrument and to the bellows. It's a different skill to playing the pipe organ actually. On the pipe organ you would play the bass line with your feet, whereas on the harmonium all of those notes have to be played with your hands, which is trickier for an organist. Hence the slightly slower speed. Now, ancient music. Here's the plan. I would like to play you 3 pieces. The first is the oldest kind of religious music that I can think of. The second is the oldest popular song that I know. And the third is the oldest specific organ piece in existence. Fascinating stuff. Interestingly, to do justice to the church and the organ, but also to my ideas here, I have to concoct a kind of hybrid between playing the organ at St. Michael's Church, but also using some of my own musical examples and music I've recorded elsewhere. So this should be fun. How are we going to do this? Why don't I play you the basic tunes on the harmonium first so that you can hear them in that building, and then we'll talk more about them. So my first example is plain song. Kyries from the Missa Orbis Factor. That is some of the earliest music in existence, over 1,000 years old. It sounds quite bare on the harmonium, doesn't it? That's because normally it would have been sung by monks in unison with words in Latin. So it brings us back to the very beginnings of religious music, certainly before the Reformation. At the time of the Reformation, music was instructed to be written in English, but this music is sung in Latin. If anything, from that harmonium performance, you could hear how timeless the melody sounds. That's because it's based on a very primitive kind of musical scale called a mode. And nowadays we still love performing and listening to plain song, even if we adjust it slightly. Listen to the very same piece performed in a completely different style. Plain song, some of the most ancient religious music, sung even before musical notation was invented, and yet sounding so modern and so refreshing. However, let's now turn to, surely, the earliest popular song ever written down on paper. This manuscript was copied between 1261 and 1264, and it was found at Reading Abbey, but it's now kept in the British Library. There are two tunes shown here, one at the top and one at the bottom. Just listen to how the main tune sounds. You have to admit, though tuneful, it's rather dull. So what do we need to do to make it sound like a proper piece of music? Well, the monk who wrote it very kindly let us know. It's written in Latin, but translated, 4 companions can sing this round. But he suggests having 6. 2 of them sing the bottom tune, and 4 of them sing the top one, but they don't all sing at exactly the same time. In fact, they're slightly out of sync with each other. What does that mean? That means this is a musical canon. One of the most genius musical forms ever. One singer starts, then another joins in with the same tune slightly later, and then another, and then another. But in this case, 4 of them do their part over the top of tune number 2 at the bottom. So if we take just the bottom tunes, and we have 2 voice parts, as shown by my electronic keyboard, we get this effect. Then we add in the main melody. That's very pleasant on its own, but the composer specifically requests that 6 voices sing the tune. So, I had some complicated work to put this together. I had my laptop, and my audio interface, and my keyboard. I recorded the tune once over, as you heard, but I overlaid it at distances of 2 bars, as the manuscript suggests. So on a fluty sound, this is what Summer Is A Comin' In should sound like. Summer Is A Comin' In, dating all the way back to the 1260s, and how I wish I had a group of 6 singers to perform it properly for you, because the lyrics really do show us how schoolboy humour never left us in the best part of 1,000 years. The ewe is bleating after her lamb, the cow is lowing after her calf, the bullock is prancing, the billy goat passes wind. That's the most vulgar thing I shall ever say on this channel, but it's true. Translated from the Middle English, that is one of the ways those lyrics have been read. Now, let's return to a more serious form of music. And now we have the earliest music for keyboard in existence. This is called the Robertsbridge Codex. It dates to 1360, and it contains the earliest surviving music written for specifically the keyboard or the organ. In this instance, it's worth giving the harmonium a go. Let's hear how this music sounds at St. Michael's Church. That is a difficult piece to take for our modern ears, isn't it? Most of it's in parallel fifths, which is almost like the stereotype of medieval music, which was completely banished in later classical music by composers like Bach. In fact, when I was at university, we were always warned against parallel fifths. However, I thought if I modernise it slightly with a change of instrument, but keep everything else the same, it might give this piece a completely different charm. Haunting keyboard music, inspired by the ancient church of St. Michael's in Dunsbourne, Rouse. And if you need any context for just how old that music is, well, you need to look no further than the medieval cross in the churchyard. Both music and cross date from the 14th century. It's interesting actually, because whenever I go to a church, I feel different, and I feel it inspires a different kind of program. If I were to ignore these kinds of buildings purely because they do not have large pipe organs in, then we would be overlooking so much of our history on this channel. But wherever I go, I'm always trying my best to produce something which I know that you'll find interesting. If you're enjoying today's program so far, you can leave me a small donation if you'd like to. I cover so many miles on this channel, and I do have to visit these churches more than once, I will admit, to make sure that I have as much information as possible. If you'd like to support me, you can leave a donation using PayPal. If you look underneath my video, there's a link there. Click on that and it takes you to my PayPal donations page. And from there you can leave a small contribution if you'd like to, and if you look forward to these videos on a Sunday evening. Thank you so much for your help. It is integral to me actually being able to produce these videos in the first place. Thank you. It's time to end in perhaps a more traditional manner on this channel with a hymn tune. I have a deep respect for harmoniums, so I'd like to close with a hymn which to me can be played in all of its perfection on an instrument like this one. It's called Love Divine, or Love's Excelling. If you're here for the first time, please remember to click on the subscribe button. It doesn't cost a penny. I mention it because if I don't, nobody subscribes. If I do, people subscribe. It's as simple as that. Thanks so much. And I will see you next time. Cheerio.